gonna take this to killing school. Class start next week. You gotta at least have 2 bodies though.
Hear that? That's not just rap talk. That was Lil Jeff, live and unfiltered, setting the entrance requirements for his so-called killing school. From openly bragging about bodies in his diss track FTO to mocking fallen rivals with zero remorse, his reputation as one of the most ruthless figures in the streets only grew. This was a man who turned violence into entertainment, laughing about real-life murders on Instagram like it was just another joke. And if that wasn't enough, he took it a step further, gunning down 2 high school students and still finding a way to joke about it online. Cold-blooded, unfiltered, absolutely savage. These are Lil Jeff's most savage moments. Murders. Lil Gutta in a targeted hit. Lil Jeff lived by one rule: strike first and make it brutal. Of all the things he did, this was among the most ruthless. A broad daylight execution, carried out without hesitation. No mask, no fear, just a clear message to the streets. If you cross Lil Jeff, there's no warning, just bullets. This guy was not the type to let things slide. When someone from his side got killed, he made sure there was payback. And on May 13th, 2021, he did exactly that. It was a regular afternoon near East 79th Street in Chicago. The streets were busy. Cars rolled by, people stood around talking, and shops had customers going in and out. Nobody knew that a killing was about to happen. Lil Jeff had been watching Lil Gutta, real name Ronnie L. Sistrunk Jr., for a while. Gutta was moving like he had no enemies, walking through the city without a care. But his name had already been linked to Cruz murder a month earlier, and that was a serious problem. Whether Gutta had actually been involved didn't matter. What mattered was that Jeff believed he was. Jeff waited for the right moment. He wasn't the type to rush things. Gutta had just come out of a store, checking his phone, completely unaware of what was coming. Jeff moved in quickly. No words, no warnings. Bang! The first shot hit Gutta in the chest. His body jerked, and his phone fell from his hand. Before he could react, another shot, then another. Each one meant to make sure he wasn't getting back up. People screamed, some ducked, others ran. Jeff didn't stick around. He walked off, blending into the crowd like nothing had happened. By the time police arrived, Gutta was already dead. Witnesses had seen what happened, but no one was willing to talk. The streets knew who was responsible, but no one wanted to be next. A daytime hit was already a moment that had the streets whispering. But Jeff didn't just stop there. He took his savagery to the mic and turned 7 bodies into lyrics. Boasts about killing 7 people in FTO. The drill scene had always been filled with bold lyrics and street talk, but in March 2024, a song dropped that had people questioning whether the words were just music or real confessions. The track was called FTO, and as soon as it hit the streets, it became one of the most talked about songs that year. Lil Jeff and Vert had been teasing the release for weeks. When it finally dropped, the energy was violent, raw, and reckless. The lyrics had no filter. Jeff rapped about taking 7 lives, bragging like it was just another achievement. The way he delivered it was too specific, too detailed, making people wonder if he had really done everything he claimed. But one part of the song stood out more than anything else. Jeff called out Leal by name, mocking his death with the line, "Leal dumb in a pack, we smoke him." It wasn't just a disrespectful line, it was a direct celebration of someone's murder. That was not the only part that got people talking. Another verse mentioned how his old friends, whom he used to be cool with, have now become his ops. He also mentioned how his crew had shot so much on Rhodes Avenue that their enemies had to shut down their drug spots. If true, this meant his side had not just taken lives, but also taken over entire trap operations, forcing their rivals to leave the area. The song spread fast. It was played in cars, blasted at parties, and debated in drill forums. People argued about whether Jeff's claims were exaggerated or if he had really dropped 7 bodies. No matter what the truth was, one thing was clear. Jeff had no fear of what he said or who heard it. His reputation for self-snitching was already growing, but FTO took it to another level. Now, was Jeff exaggerating his numbers, or was he really keeping score? That question didn't last long, because his next moment made it clear that when Jeff rapped about murder, it wasn't fiction. Gets revenge for Z-Money by killing Lil Pooh. Lil Jeff had been waiting for the right time, and when the moment came, he made sure it was merciless. Z-Money's death had left a wound that only blood could close, and in March 2023, Jeff set his sights on Lil Pooh. Pooh, real name Pierre Boozer Jr., had been moving around. Like nothing had changed. He still showed up in familiar places, still laughed with his people, still acted as if his name wasn't being whispered in the streets. But Jeff had already decided that Pooh wasn't going to see the summer. The plan was set in motion days before. Jeff didn't move sloppy. He didn't just roll up and start shooting. Instead, he let Pooh's own routine work against him. He sent word through mutuals, spreading talk that a certain block was safe again, knowing Pooh would hear it. Pooh took the bait, showing up like nothing was wrong. That night, the trap was set. Pooh pulled into the driveway of his home, the place he always returned to after a long day. He stepped out of his car, nodding at someone he recognized. The night was quiet, with only the distant hum of the city in the background. Everything seemed normal. Then the lights in the lot flickered. A small moment, barely noticeable. But in that second of distraction, a figure moved moved out of the shadows. The first shot hit Pooh's leg. He dropped to the ground, grabbing his knee, trying to crawl toward his home. He didn't make it. More shots followed, fast and unrelenting. The last one hit him in the back of the head, leaving him face down on the pavement. A car engine roared, tires screeched, and the shooter was gone. Witnesses stood frozen, and when the police arrived, nobody had seen a thing. But the streets knew. A year later, Jeff made sure the message was clear when he left a comment on an Instagram post about Pooh, confirming the motive. Disrespecting Z-Money came with consequences. Then came the leaked song, days before Jeff's own death. He rapped about hiding in the grass, waiting to strike, describing the exact way Pooh had been caught. After taking out Lil Pooh, most would have laid low. But Jeff, he wasn't done proving himself. His next moment came fast, and this time bullets were flying from a moving car. Orders a drive-by on Black. Lil Jeff had made a lot of enemies, and when things got serious, he did not hesitate to remove them. In March 2022, the streets started buzzing about a drive-by shooting in Chatham. The target was Roger Lewis, known as Black, a 33-year-old OG who had been well respected in his area. Black had been standing outside his house that evening. He was talking with someone, not paying attention to the street, unaware that a car had been rolling by slowly. The people inside were watching him closely, waiting for the right moment. The driver kept steady, and the backseat window was slightly open. As the car crept closer, there was a brief pause. Then the sound of rapid gunfire filled the air. Black barely had time to react. He tried to turn, but bullets had already ripped through him. His body dropped near the sidewalk as the car sped off, disappearing down the street before anyone could get a good look at it. The neighborhood fell silent for a moment. A few people ducked inside their houses. Others peeked out, already knowing there was nothing they could do. By the time the police arrived, Black was gone. A month later, a man named Trayvon Dix was arrested in connection to the shooting. But even after his arrest, people kept talking. Many believed Jeff had ordered the hit. The tension between his crew and Black's people had been getting worse, and this felt like a move to settle things. Jeff never addressed the rumors, but he did what he always did. He let his music do the talking. A few weeks later, he dropped a song with lyrics that made people wonder. He mentioned how some older guys think they run things until they get caught standing outside at the wrong time. A drive-by was already a wild moment, but Jeff had a habit of outdoing himself. When two bodies dropped on the same night, the streets knew. This wasn't just war, it was domination. Orchestrates a double murder. Lil Jeff had been involved in a lot of street violence, but November 1st, 2023 stood out as one of his most ruthless moments. Two people lost their lives that night in what many believed was a planned execution. The targets were Denardo Buford, known as Lil Deuce, and Desiree McGee, known as D-Money. The two friends had been sitting in a parked car on South Dorchester Avenue, probably thinking it was just another night. They might have been talking, scrolling through their phones, or just passing time. They had no idea they were being watched. A black SUV had been circling the area. It passed by once, then again, moving slowly. No one inside the car made any sudden moves. They were waiting for the right moment. Then it happened. The SUV stopped a few feet away. The doors swung open, and before anyone could react, gunmen stepped out and opened fire. Glass shattered. Bullets ripped through metal and flesh. Little Deuce and D-Money never had a chance to escape. The attack was over in seconds, but the damage was done. By the time the shooters got back into the SUV and sped off, both victims were critically wounded. They were rushed to the University of Chicago Medical Center, but it was too late. Neither of them survived. The police arrived quickly, finding multiple shell casings scattered around the scene. But as always, no one was willing to talk. The case remained open, and no charges were ever filed against Jeff. Still, the streets had their own way of confirming things. In March 2024, Jeff posted a cryptic Instagram story. It was simple, just a few emojis, but people knew what it meant. The message seemed to be a list of names, and one of them was clearly linked to D-Money's murder. You'd think after a double murder, Jeff would want to keep quiet, but no. His next moment was in the studio, rapping about his victims with details only the killer could know. Admits to murder in his song, Ah. By early 2024, Lil Jeff's name was already tied to countless street rumors. But when he dropped Ah in February, the conversation took a turn. It wasn't just another drill track full of threats and tough talk. This one felt like a confession. The beat was dark, the flow was aggressive, but it was the lyrics that made people stop and listen. In one chilling line, Jeff described a victim screaming before taking his last breath. The way he rapped it, like he was reliving the moment, made people immediately connect it to the murders of Monty and Lil Rob. For those who remembered how the two were killed, the details were too accurate to ignore. Monty had been left gasping for air on the sidewalk, and Lil Rob's final moments were eerily similar to what Jeff was rapping about. Within hours of its release, the internet caught fire. Reddit threads were filled with people breaking down the lyrics and matching them to real-life events. Drill forums argued over whether Jeff was bragging or setting himself up for trouble. Some fans defended him, saying he was just telling a story, but others believed he had done what many rappers before him had been accused of, self-snitching in the booth. This wasn't the first time Jeff had been suspected of putting real murders into his songs, but took things to another level. It wasn't just about who got hit or where it happened. This time, it was about how they died, what they said in their last seconds, and how Jeff felt watching it happen. He never responded to the accusations. He never clarified the meaning, but he didn't have to. The damage was already done. Rapping about bodies is one thing, but saying it live, that's a moment only someone who truly doesn't fear death would create. And Jeff, he laughed while updating his body count. Updates his body count to 10 on Instagram Live. The energy on Instagram felt different on the night of May 13th, 2024. Thousands of people were tuned in, waiting to see what Lil Jeff would say next. He sat in front of the camera, relaxed, flipping through a thick stack of money. His wrist shined every time he moved, the diamonds on his Rolex catching the light. The comment section moved so fast it was impossible to keep up. As the live went on, the conversation took a dark turn. Jeff started talking about the streets, about the people he had lost, and the ones who had lost their lives because of him. With a smirk, he leaned back and made a statement that shook everyone watching. The comment section exploded. Some fans hyped him up, while others were shocked. His enemies, whether they were watching or someone sent them the clip later, had all the information they needed. He made it clear that the body count had gone up. Next to him, Q50, a close associate, added his own numbers, fueling even more speculation. If anyone thought Jeff was exaggerating, hearing Q50 confirm his own count only made it more believable. The live continued with Jeff taunting his rivals, daring them to respond. He laughed as he fanned out his money, showing no concern for what he had just admitted. It didn't take long for the clip to spread. Reddit forums, drill pages, and even law enforcement were all talking about it. People debated if he was being serious or if it was all for attention, but those who knew how the streets worked believed every word. This moment made him a bigger target, not just for the police, but for the people he had been calling out. It was one thing to move in silence, but going on live and saying it out loud, that was something else. If claiming 10 bodies wasn't insane enough, Jeff's next moment had people shaking their heads. Not only did he kill, but he demanded the same from anyone who wanted to roll with him. Brags about his killing school requirement. In early February 2024, Lil Jeff's Instagram post had the city talking. He said he was going to start a killing school, and the requirement was a minimum of 2 bodies.
I'm taking just a killing school. Class start next week. You gotta at least have 2 bodies though. For I ain't coming with no. If you ain't got I can't work with no beginners.
But that's not all. The post started with a message about his enemies, accusing them of taking out innocent people instead of handling real street business. It was a direct shot at those who had been speaking on his name. But what really caught people's attention was the photo that came with it. Jeff had a fresh tattoo, 10 teardrops inked onto his skin. The streets already understood what that meant. Each teardrop was a body, a life taken. Some people even speculated that 2 of them were for Lil Rob and Monty, 2 names connected to past murders. As if that wasn't enough, he lined up a series of emojis in the caption, carefully placed in a way that seemed to match 10 victims. The message was clear, but not direct enough to be a confession. Jeff knew how to say a lot without saying too much. His close associate, Q50, didn't let the moment pass. He followed up with his own post, updating his body count to 8. If anyone had doubts about Jeff's claims, hearing Q50 confirm his own numbers only made it feel more real. The conversation around the post spread quickly. Some laughed it off, saying he was just rapping. But was he really? Jeff had already made it clear. His circle wasn't for amateurs. But when he posted a cryptic message that looked like a list of his victims, it became a moment the internet couldn't ignore. Posts a cryptic message listing his victims. Lil Jeff was known for stirring controversy, but in April 2024, he took things to another level. Instead of making a direct statement, he dropped a post that had the whole city talking. The post contained lyrics from an unreleased King Von song, but what really caught people's attention was what came after. Below the lyrics, Jeff added 10 emojis. At first, it looked random, but the streets quickly started putting the pieces together. One emoji stood out more than the rest, a woman's hat. It did not take long for fans to link it to D-Money, a known name in street circles. People believed it was a coded reference to his female nickname, a slick way of saying he was responsible for the murder without actually saying it. The conversation spread fast. Was this a body count? Was he listing his victims? Some thought it was a way to taunt his enemies. Others called it another case of self-snitching, something Jeff had already been accused of multiple times. Despite the backlash, Jeff refused to take the post down. He never explained its meaning, never corrected the speculation. Instead, he let people argue and debate, watching as his name spread even further. Nobody knew if the emojis really represented lives lost, but one thing was clear. Jeff wanted people to keep guessing, and he made sure they never stopped talking. Some killers leave evidence behind by accident. Jeff, he turned it into a moment. Flaunting stolen watches and bloodied hands, he wasn't just sending a message, he was mocking the dead. Taunts ops with stolen watches and bloody hands. Social media had always been a tool for Lil Jeff, but in early 2024, he used it to send a message that had everyone watching. This time, it wasn't a song, a cryptic caption, or a live stream. It was a set of pictures that spoke louder than words. The first image showed two expensive watches, both sitting on his wrist. The brands were easy to recognize, the kind of jewelry that only a few people in the city could afford. But it wasn't about the price. It was about who they belonged to. Word spread fast that they had been stolen from 6,300 Breado, a known rival. Jeff didn't just take them, he posted them for the world to see, making sure Breado and his people felt the disrespect. The second image was even worse. His hands were covered in blood. Nobody needed an explanation. The meaning was clear. He was claiming to have done something violent, something that took him to a different level in the streets. Whether it was a real confession or just a way to boost his image, the message was the same. He wanted his enemies to know he wasn't done. People immediately connected this to something deeper. Months earlier, Jeff had been robbed by BKN members, an incident that had been laughed about on social media. Some saw this as his way of getting revenge, letting them know he had taken something back. The pictures fueled the fire between him and his rivals, making it clear that the situation was far from over. It wasn't just about the stolen watches, it was about power, and Jeff wanted everyone to know he was still in control. If there was ever a moment that showed Jeff was living without limits, it was this. Sniffing perks on camera, slurring words, laughing about murder. He wasn't hiding anything anymore. Sniffs Percocet during an interview. Lil Jeff had built a reputation for being reckless, both in the streets and in the way he carried himself in public. He had been known to brag about his crimes, taunt his enemies online, and show no fear of consequences. But in May 2024, he took things even further during an interview that left people wondering if he had completely lost control. He was sitting across from DJ-U, a well-known interviewer in the drill scene. The cameras were rolling, and thousands of people were tuned in, waiting to hear what he had to say. At first, the conversation was normal. He talked about his music, his street life, and his growing influence. But as the interview went on, his energy shifted. In the middle of answering a question, Jeff reached into his pocket, pulled out a crushed up Percocet, and sniffed it right in front of the camera. The room went quiet for a second. Even DJ-U, who had seen plenty of wild interviews, looked caught off guard. Jeff leaned back and laughed. Q50, sitting beside him, chuckled as well, hyping up the moment. Jeff then compared himself to Tony Montana, the infamous drug lord from Scarface, as if he was living out a scene from the movie. As the interview continued, his words started to slur. He mumbled about his body count, joking about the people he had allegedly killed. Some thought he was putting on an act, but others saw it as a sign that he was spiraling out of control. When the clip hit social media, it spread fast. Some fans hyped him up, but many criticized him, saying he had taken things too far. The moment became another example of Jeff's reckless and unpredictable nature. Jeff had already given the world plenty of disturbing moments, but this, laughing about two murdered high schoolers, this was proof. He wasn't just reckless, he was heartless. Jokes about killing two high school students. Lil Jeff had always been known for mocking his enemies, but in February 2024, he crossed a line that even his own fans found disturbing. Two teenagers had been shot and killed near Washington in the loot, and while their families mourned, Jeff used the moment to entertain himself. The victims, 17-year-old Monterio Williams and 16-year-old Robert Boston, were still being talked about on the news when Jeff made his post. It was a simple picture, but the message behind it was dark. He was sitting back holding up two blunts, smoke curling around his face. The caption was vague, but people didn't need an explanation. They already knew what he was referring to, and the timing of the post made it even more obvious. Within minutes, his comment section exploded. Some laughed, understanding what he was implying. Others were disgusted, calling him out for being heartless. The post started circulating on drill pages and Twitter, with people debating if it was a coincidence or if he was claiming responsibility for the killings. Some people even compared it to past incidents where rappers had hinted at real-life crimes through their social media posts. Jeff saw the backlash but didn't care. Instead of deleting the post, he kept making reckless statements, making it clear he was not worried about what anyone thought. He had been accused of self-snitching before, but this time it felt different. The way he casually joked about two teenagers losing their lives made it seem like he had no limits. The families of the victims spoke out, expressing their pain and anger. Community leaders called for action, saying this was proof of how drill culture was getting out of control. But Jeff continued posting, refusing to show any remorse. Whether he was truly involved or not, the damage was done. The post became one of the most disturbing moments of his career, adding to the long list of reasons why people saw him as one of the most reckless figures in the drill scene. For years, Jeff had created savage moments at the expense of others. But on June 8th, 2024, his final moment came when he ran into a house and never came back out alive. Chases an op into a house, then gets gunned down. In the streets, every move comes with consequences. Some take longer to arrive, but they always do. For Lil Jeff, June 8th, 2024 was the day everything caught up with him. It was a moment that would mark the violent end of a name that had caused fear and chaos for years. It happened on South Rhodes Avenue, a place that had seen its fair share of shootouts, but nothing like this. Witnesses saw Jeff chasing an enemy, moving fast, determined, and focused on only one thing. The man he was after sprinted toward a house, grabbed the door, and disappeared inside. Most people would have hesitated, but Jeff didn't stop. He followed without thinking, stepping through the doorway, convinced he had the upper hand. The moment he entered, gunfire erupted. The house was not a place of safety for his enemy. It was a trap. The people inside had been waiting, and Jeff had walked straight into their setup. Shots came from different angles. 19 bullets tore into Jeff's body before he even had the chance to fire back. His crew, who had been right behind him, immediately returned fire, turning the quiet street into a war zone. By the time the shooting stopped, the damage was beyond repair. 58 shell casings were scattered across the scene. The walls were torn apart by bullets, and the floor was covered in blood. Jeff's crew saw him lying there, barely clinging to life. They had a choice: stay and fight or leave. They chose to run. By the time the police arrived, the house was empty. The ones who had set the trap had disappeared. Lil Jeff was gone too. His story ended the same way he had lived, surrounded by gunfire with no second chances. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.